Yep, just
Read
did.
my mind. Perfect. And I was letting people in. It's back to you. Folks, my name is Jordan Canerick. I'm the founder of Canerick Consulting, partner of CollegeWise. CollegeWise is a large counseling firm here in the United States. I've been doing this work for quite a while now. I've been a college counselor for a little over 12 years. Prior to that, I worked in the Gettysburg College admissions office. I spent some time at the Princeton Review, where I was getting my certification in counseling from both UCLA and Columbia. So I can promise you I know what I'm talking about. And before we actually start today's seminar, I just want to give you an overview of what we're talking about. You're going to find that very rarely am I reading what's on the slides to you. And for those of you who are just joining, number one, all of this is being recorded. So if you feel like you missed part of it, do not worry. You will have access to the recording afterwards. And number two, if you want these slides, you can email me when we're done here today. My email's in the chat and be thrown there a couple more times. Miss Heald will have them. So don't feel like you're missing anything or need to take pictures. You can have access to all this after. Now, as we get going, you're going to see I'm going to go through a lot today. And it's going to be very focused on highly selective colleges. It's going to be focused on roughly 50 to 60 schools here in the United States. And the reason I'm telling you that is because we do other seminars and webinars that focus on finding the right fit, on identifying one of the 4,000 institutions here just in the United States that could be good for you. But tonight we're really focusing on what we would call the top 50 or 60. And I'm calling them top 50 or 60 because there's a ranking system that puts them there. I will be the first to tell you that these rankings are meaningless. These rankings are oftentimes flawed. There's a reason that Columbia University had to pull out of them for a couple of years. They weren't giving honest data. That said, I do know that oftentimes we find ourselves looking at rankings, wondering what it takes to get into a top 20 school or things of that nature. So while I would be more than happy to argue the efficacies of rankings down the line, we will ignore that tonight and focus on what highly selective means, what it's looking like with these highly selectives these days, what the trends are looking like, and then digging into what these schools are seeking. As we go through, please feel free to take to the chat, ask your questions. I will pause from time to time to get to questions. Miss Heald is quite knowledgeable herself. She might respond to them. And at the end, with whatever time we have left over, we will do a Q&A. So that in mind, let's kick things off. And the first thing I want to make sure you understand is that there's a couple things to keep in mind as we start. The first is that you don't need to go to a highly ranked institution to get a great education. I mean that. I went to Gettysburg College. It was my safety school. It wasn't where I expected to end up. But when I visited, I fell in love with the school. I got to meet an amazing professor in the poli sci department. He ended up being my advisor. In fact, he ended up helping me with my thesis down the line. So great educations happen everywhere. And secondly, what you do in college is more important than where you go. And if you do not believe me, you go, Jordan, you're BSing me. Watch Malcolm Gladwell's Zeitgeist. I won't try to spell it because I don't know German. I just know it's called Zeitgeist and it's on YouTube. It's about 40 minutes and it's Malcolm Gladwell speaking to the Google execs, showing in real time with data how a student graduating number one or two in his class at a school that has a 90% admit rate is more likely to have success in the job market, grad school, and so on than somebody who's lower down at even a Harvard or a Yale. But that is the last I'm going to speak about the other schools. Let's focus on highly selective and let's start with what that means. Our definition of highly selective is any school that has less than a 20% admit rate. Each year, we are seeing more schools that are in this category. When I started this job back in what was that, 2014 or so, 2015 maybe? It was early 2015. There we go, Jordan. Good math. There were probably about 40 schools that fell into this category, and now we're closer to 60. And one of the things you have to consider is there are schools that show a 32% admit rate, but because of where you live, that admit rate is lower. And we'll get into that. But the reason I want you to understand what a highly selective school is because what it means is that your grades don't just get you in. Having a 4.0 with an IB diploma at BCC or with 10 APs just makes you standard strong. And it's very rare that I ever look at a student and say, you have a good chance at getting into Hopkins or into Yale, unless they're a highly recruited athlete, a triple legacy with everything going for them, or their name is on the building at that school. So you're a great student coming out of Northwest. You have great course rigor, strong grades, a 1530 SAT. Yeah, you have every right to apply to these highly selectives. But no, you don't have a good chance, just like that similar student at RM or BCC or Poolsville doesn't. And no, that doesn't mean you did something wrong. It's just the nature of these institutions. And there's no magical formula to get in. It's not like doing this and this automatically mean you get in. So when you try and emulate what last year's Key Club president did to get into Yale, well, they don't want that same exact applicant the next year. They don't want the person who did the exact same thing. They want different individuals. They want people who are going to add to their institution, who are what they call pointed applicants. So often you'll hear people talk about how well-rounded their kid is. And well-rounded is good. It means you have a lot of skill sets. But there's plenty of well-rounded individuals who apply to the highly selectives. And when you're well-rounded, you're just one in hundreds of thousands. When you're pointed and have a specific skill set that we desire, that is when you stand out to your Ivies, to your Dukes, and so on. So what does pointed mean? It means that you are potentially that recruited athlete. It means that you're the number one debater in the nation, and that school is going to want you because you're going to be competing on their team. It means that you have a number of national and international awards in DECA and FBLA and Science Olympiad, and you're going to add to our institution in a way that another one of these interesting and compelling students would not. These schools like Princeton have touted for years that every single season they get 2.5 classes worth of just valedictorians. So even if that year they only wanted the number one student from any given institution, they would still have to deny a class and a half worth of valedictorians. And no, they don't just want valedictorians because valedictorians, having just a bunch of them, doesn't make it an interesting, compelling student body. They want people with different backgrounds, major-wise, geographically, interests, and so on. Now, you might be thinking, well, this year there's a drop in birth rates for the class of 2027. And that's true. So does that mean that given that and the fact that international applicants there are fewer of them applying, that for some reason, like I should potentially be taking my shot at these more selective schools? It's your right to do whatever you'd like. But there's proof in the pudding that those numbers haven't significantly dropped as everyone thought they would. They're still way up from the pre-COVID era. Students are applying to more and more colleges. Why? Because there's this belief that if I throw out 18 applications to the top 18 schools, one of them has to come through for me, right? They don't. They don't have to say yes. In fact, many of them won't. And again, it's not because you've done something wrong. It's because they get so many applicants and they only have so much space. Now, you sit there and you wonder, but if that's the case, end of the day, they have to take some of us, right? They will. UPenn, I believe, got nearly 80 applicants from, it was 68 applicants from WJ last year. They took 2. And at RM, I think that number is actually closer to 4. But when you consider the fact that of the 68 applicants, 2 got in, divide 2 by 68 and realize that you can be an incredible applicant, but this year they may have wanted somebody different. A student I loved working with just a couple years ago from BCC, he applied ED to Cornell, and he was a great fit. And he ended up getting deferred in early decision, meaning he got pushed to regular decision. And he found out that his best friend, who was in a lot of his classes with him, very similar background in rocketry and so on, she got in. It was 2 young individuals from the same school applying to an engineering program at Cornell that has a 4% admit rate, and they took one. And they took the young lady because some of these programs, they're looking to diversify in gender, in background, in interests. And so because of that, he didn't get into that school. He's at Georgia Tech and thriving in their engineering program, but it can be as simple as that. Another individual who has a slightly different background or of a different gender or has a slightly different hook getting in. I know that's not easy to hear, but you need to understand these trends. And it is why you keep hearing people talk about things like early decision. Early decision means that it is a binding contract. If you are admitted, you are going to that school. And the 12 schools you see in front of you right now, these are their ED rates for the class of 2025. Class of 2026 data is not yet available. Once it is, I promise I'll share it. But this is for the class of 2025. And each of these 12 admitted more than half of their class in the binding scenario. Why would they do that? Isn't Penn going to get their number anyways? Isn't Brown always going to get its class? Of course they will. But by filling this much in early decision, they guarantee a certain yield. Yield is percentage of admitted students who end up attending my school. Why do I care about yield if I know I'm going to get my number anyways? Because it comes back to ranking. If my yield is high and my admit rate is low and my average test score goes from 1510 to 1520, I might move up from number 11 to number 10. And that ranking right there, all of a sudden, will get me more applications because people care about rankings for all the wrong reasons, but they do. So schools will use early decision to fill their classes. And some schools are even going further than just ED. U Chicago now has an agreement that if you join their summer session early notification program, which by the way costs $6,000 to $7,000 for 3 weeks, you can apply before ED and find out that you're in September or October. And some students will do that, despite the fact that if they're bound to the school, it will cost them nearly $100,000 a year. They will do this in hopes of getting into a highly prestigious school. And they'll take a few kids in that round, but they won't take many. But they created this so that they can start to capture early. Just as other schools like Emory, Northeastern, Vanderbilt, Wake, they know that there are students who are very strong who won't get into Ivy levels or into Duke or into Northwestern. So what have they done? They've created an ED2 round, meaning that when that kid doesn't get in, they might try and capture them in a second round of ED and bind them there. For these colleges, it is about their yield, it is about the percentage of students they end up taking, and it's about their ranking. For you, this is your student's livelihood. This is your stress level for the next year or more. But for them, it all comes down to the number. And I'm not lying to you when I talk about how important yield is. Here are the numbers for some of the schools and what they did through 21 to 24, and how, as you can see, a number of them reduced the number of students they end up taking because they figured out through ED, where they bind students, and through all the data that they have, who was more likely to commit to them in early action if they offer it or regular decision. And it allowed them to drop the number of students they actually took. So even though MIT, Duke, Brown, Dartmouth, Yale, and Harvard all saw more applicants, for some of them, they were actually able to take a couple fewer any given year and still hit their ideal yield. They have this all figured out. They've looked, they have so much money invested in the data science behind this to understand where they need to take students from and of what caliber to make sure they get them. And this ED piece is so important to them for that reason. So Tulane has a near 35% admit rate in early decision because they fill 63% of their class when they only have like 1,000 to 2,000 applicants. And then in regular decision and early action, the non-binding rounds, they get 10 times that number, and they have only, 37% of the class left? So Tulane has a 35% admit rate in ED and closer to 6 to 7% in your region of Montgomery County for regular decision. A huge difference. So what I'm driving at here is not to drive fear into your hearts about these schools, but to understand what students are doing to try and give themselves a leg up. And this is where the issue of the rich getting richer perpetuates itself. If you get into UPenn, ED, you're now going to UPenn, which is amazing for you. But are you comfortable with 90 plus thousand a year for 4 years before grad school, med school? Well, you might say, well, no, I'm not. So in that case, I wouldn't do it. You've bound yourself. If you pull out, you have a huge negative impact on your community because they can blackball your school or your district for the next year or two because of your decision to try and play the game without knowing the rules. So if you go ED, you need to be prepared to go unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstance. So for example, an unfortunate one, I know a student who got into an Ivy League a year ago. Both of his parents lost their jobs due to the government shutdown, among other things. He had to contact that school and pull out. And no, that school didn't hold it against that student. They understood and they felt bad. And that student went to UMD honors and is doing great. So there are extenuating circumstances where they will release you from it. But if they do not, you got to be prepared for that number. I'm focusing a lot on some of the more private institutions, and I see there might be some questions coming in. I will pause in a moment, but let me take us to the public schools. You might be thinking, well, Jordan, I'm not looking at Dartmouth. I'm looking at UVA, UNC. Those are easier to get into, right? Not necessarily. The data you see in front of you shows you what we sometimes refer to as the public Ivies, UT, UNC, UCLA, and their admits. Because these are schools that have huge in-state quotas that they must meet to get their state funding. UT, they take 5% across the board. 5% of all of the top students in the state of Texas, not just Austin, but in the state of Texas, from public schools are automatically admitted to UT. So when they've already filled roughly 90% of their class with kids from that state, how much room do you think they actually have to fill with the other 49 states and international applicants? UNC, as you see, it's 82%. Florida, it's roughly 80% in state. So these are exceptionally hard schools to get into out of state. So when you look online, you see that Florida has like a 25, 26% admit rate. You go, huh, that's a target school for me. Not if you're out of state. And then you have UMD, who seems to love everyone other than people in your area nowadays. That's a whole different ballgame. But my point is, don't let the admit rate you see reported online tell you what you think you know. Dig in and understand their in-state versus out-of-state requirements. Understand that for Maryland, the issue right now is that for a decade up until COVID and even into early COVID, your district, your area treated it as a backup. No one wanted to stay in College Park or be that close to home. No one wanted to use it. People would afford to go out of state and go to University of Wisconsin over Maryland or go to Michigan over Maryland. So all of a sudden, UMD decided, why am I going to do this to myself? Why am I going to hurt my yield and my ranking? We're going to take kids from Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Howard County. And yeah, we're still going to take plenty from your area. We're going to be a lot more selective about it. It's why 5 years ago you saw students with 3.738 getting in every year, and now having a 3.9 and 1480 SAT puts you in a spring admit. They're using your area MCPS to fill what they would consider the cream of the crop, and then push everyone else off. Is that fair to you? No. But we, the consumer, gave them the data they needed to realize what they had to do if they're going to take students from the area. So the reality here, folks, is that many of these schools are reaches for everybody, not just you because you have 1B, or not just you because you took 4 APs instead of 5. Like I said before, there's very few students who I can say have a good shot at a top 20 school. And grades and test scores are just the bare minimum. Those are what they call standard strong. You have to go beyond that. Your activities have to show me why you're such an incredible individual and a great talent and someone we want here compared to the other incredible students. So before we actually dig into what those students are doing or what they look like, I believe there are some questions. Let me see if I can pull this up. What does REA mean on the last slide? Great question. So REA is restrictive early action. Some schools along the lines of Harvard, Yale, and then Princeton, who else? Stanford and Notre Dame. Those schools offer restrictive early action. Restrictive early action means that you're not bound. You're not going ED, but you can't go ED anywhere. You can't bind yourself somewhere, and you can't go early action to private schools. So let's say that your top schools on your list are Yale, MIT, and University of Miami. And let's go with UMD. And you go REA to Yale. Well, while MIT and Miami offer EA, you can't do that because they're private schools, so now you have to go regular decision. UMD, since it's a state school, you can still go EA. REA means that while people aren't bound, so some people like that, their admit rates are lower in that round because they're not binding anyone. It's why you didn't see those schools on this list. Because REA, they get to decide, they take the cream of the crop in REA, they push everyone else out, knowing that they didn't go ED, and they'll either deny or consider you down the road. It's for the 5 of the most selective schools in the nation. Are ED students not up for financial aid? They are. But truth be told, very few students in the Montgomery County area and families actually meet the bare minimum for financial aid. All these schools will meet FinAid requirements. If your family proves that they need it, they'll give it to you. But many students are in this position where they want but don't need by the eyes of the government. 90,000 a year is a huge number. I don't care who you are. But if your family doesn't make the minimum necessary for financial aid, you'll be on the hook for that money. What's the timetable for FinAid versus the admissions timeline? You'll complete the financial aid information in October, November time of your senior year. You'll get admitted, and then they'll give you the information after that within usually 3 to 4 weeks via packet. I'll answer 2 more questions and we're going to move on. Is there truth to highly selective schools wanting 4 years of foreign language, regardless of where begin in 9th grade? Yes. If you do not have 3 or 4+ years of foreign language, it's very hard to stand out to the highly selectives. Now, that could be 7th grade Spanish 1, 8th grade Spanish 2, freshman year Spanish 3, junior year or sophomore year Spanish 4, and be done then. But if you only have Spanish 1, 2, 3, and you don't want to do 4, and you're applying to these schools, think again. So to answer the question, if you do Spanish 4 in ninth grade and you stop from there, you're okay. And one more question. Do you apply to FAFSA in only senior year? Yes, you can't apply before senior year. And if you do get money, you will be expected to do the FAFSA every year your student is in college because it'll use new tax data and basically recalculate from there. For those of you curious, if you want to know whether or not you might be able to expect something, type into Google net price calculator plus a school name. Net price calculator plus Harvard, net price calculator plus Dartmouth, net price calculator plus Wash U. And then it'll ask you some questions, you'll complete it. And from there, you'll get a sense as to whether or not you might have a qualifying student aid index, SAI. Do it for a few schools and see what they say. And are ED students ever getting merit-based scholarships, or does ED normally prevent that? ED doesn't necessarily prevent that, but the schools we're talking about here don't give merit aid. They just like it. Wash U has a couple merit scholarships you can apply for, very selective. Vanderbilt does as well, but most of these schools don't offer merit. They don't have to. They will use their money that they have to pay for financial aid or to attract a very strong athlete. But I have not seen a student get into Duke, Columbia, Dartmouth, Penn, Cornell, Brown, Emory, Hopkins, or Northwestern in nearly a decade with merit aid. So if you're applying to these schools and you're not getting anything from FAFSA, be prepared to pay full price or apply for hundreds of private scholarships after you apply through sites like what is it? Fastweb.com is a good one. I'll throw these in the chat for you. They have good scholarships. Scholarship.com has good scholarships. Scholarship 360, there you go, Kate. So these are ones you can start applying for in senior year. Prioritize your applications first, but then you're going to apply for these. So let's get back into the topic at hand. We now know the trends. So what's next? One of my favorite stories came from a colleague of mine who worked in the Caltech admissions office for about 5 years. And he remembered every year, because he wasn't the director, but he was part of the team. He remembered every year starting to read applications and reading hundreds of them over a month. And he'd fall in love with a few of them, 8, 9 of them, 8 or 9 out of nearly 600. He would go bring those to committee where all the admissions officers come together and start talking about who they want to admit. And the director would get up and say, we are going to be aiming for an 8 to 10% admit rate this year based on the number of applications. And in that moment, his heart would always sink, because he knew that despite reading hundreds of applications and finding what he considered the best of the best, so already in his own review, choosing 10%, he's now being told that he will get one of them in, maybe two. And that is how difficult it is when it comes to these schools. There are different things that come into play, like being an athlete, like being a first generation student, like right now being a student who is applying from the continent of Africa because numbers are so low from Africa right now. But the numbers are not changing in MCPS. In fact, they're going up. Students are applying to a number of schools, and then in December they're deciding, I'll throw 4 more applications out there, and they're not applying to Ohio State and TCU. Those kids are throwing applications out to Rice, to Columbia, to Wash U just because they have time, and applying to 18 colleges. So all of a sudden, these numbers are way down. And so these admissions officers have to spend months going through these, reading 50, 60 applications a day. And from time to time, you think, oh, well, that school's test optional, or my GPA is pretty good. Let me take a shot there. But the more selective the school, the less likely they are to take a risk. These aren't the people who would be kind of going out of their way to be like, let me take a shot this diamond in the rough. He may have had 3 Bs in junior year, but I think he could be a great fit for Hopkins. No, they don't have to, because they have a number of applicants from MCPS alone with the straight A's, with the high level of course rigor, with strong test scores or interesting activities, that the moment you dip below the expectation, it's that much harder to stand out. Many of these colleges are called B free for a reason. It's very rare that students with 1 or more Bs get into these institutions unless they have an incredible hook. And not everyone does. Again, I'm not trying to tell you don't do it, but understand the reality of the situation when you're talking about schools that have single-digit admit rates. That said, every year, kids from your area are getting in. So let's dig into what they're doing, what they have. And what I want to start with are the characteristics these colleges are looking for. They call it the magic pill, or we call it the magic pill. But these are 5 characteristics that we tend to see students getting to a UPenn and onwards exude throughout their application. I'm going to give you an example of how each of them might work. So, passion. Plenty of us are part of clubs. We join clubs at school and we do it because a friend did, or a counselor told us to, or because we heard that last year's president got into X school. But passion goes beyond just joining an institution. Passion is you going further into it because of how much you enjoy it. So, an example of passion is an oboe player I know. This oboe player, he started playing in seventh grade. And the reason he picked up the oboe is because the middle school band he was a part of needed someone to play it. No one else wanted to. So he's like, fine, I'll try it out. And he wasn't very good. He actually really struggled with it. But he didn't really want to ask his parents to spend money on like some oboe tutor or teacher. So what he did is every weekend he would go to the park and he would practice because his mom basically said, please stop practicing in the house. You're driving your sister crazy and the cat's crazy. Okay. So he'd go to the park for a couple hours and he would play. And he started to slowly improve. And by ninth grade, he was good enough that when he went out for his school band, he made it. But he went further than that. He tried out for local state teams and regional teams, and he made those. And come his junior year, he wasn't just playing the oboe. He was now an oboe teacher himself. And he went back to that same middle school where he picked up the oboe. And every year he taught the new oboe players because they were still struggling to get them. So he volunteered his time there to teach them oboe. I don't know how many more times I could say the word oboe without feeling I'm about to say the word elbow on accident, but my point is, he didn't do these things because he had to. He did them because he was passionate about it. He loved it. He loved teaching. He loved playing. He loved sharing the music and the sound it made. Another example is a student I know who was exceptionally focused on becoming a pilot. He knew already that he wanted to go to Embry-Riddle, which has like a 63% admit rate, and his grades were good, so we were pretty sure he's going to get in. But despite already knowing in sophomore year what he wanted to do, he really wanted to get into flying lessons. But at that age, you can't do that unless like a family member has a plane or something, and they didn't. So he would drive all the way to Centerville, Virginia from Montgomery County. Every weekend he could. He would take the bus sometimes, and it would take him hours to get there. But he'd do that because there was a station down there where you could get flight simulation time. And he would wait there for hours to practice. In fact, when they told him that they were having some trouble and that they really wanted to open up a second station simulator, but how much money it would cost, he started raising money in his local community, asking family and friends, going door to door, and he helped them. He didn't pay for it by himself, but he brought in a couple $1,000s to help pay for it. That's passion. And that passion is shown through the initiative these students took. He took the initiative to go down to Centerville. This other student took the initiative to try the oboe. Initiative is where it all begins because we can all join something, but initiative shows me a true interest. Someone who's going to come to my campus and be a go-getter, who's either going to start an organization here that doesn't already exist, or is going to step in and help it grow. And you always hear people talking about leadership and being number one or kind of being president. Sure, that shows initiative and passion. But one of my favorite stories about initiative is a girl who is terrible at basketball. Like she admitted, the only reason that she made the team junior year for varsity is because they don't cut anyone and juniors couldn't play JV. She didn't play a minute that year, not one. But every game she was on her feet, screaming, cheering on her team, helping to get like running out there to bring water, setting up the chairs during timeouts. In senior year, every game, unless there was some reason not to, she got to sub in for a couple minutes. And even though she would get out there and she wouldn't even shoot, she would just pass the ball. She earned that because she took the initiative to be her best self and to bring that team effort. And that led to her being the individual that everyone on that team loved and adored. And so when you think about these things and you think I have to be captain or president or leader of some sort, there are plenty of those people. And yeah, they're great applicants. But so is the kid who shows me that she's never going to give up. The kid who's always going to keep a positive attitude, even if she's the worst on the team or struggling. Individuality can come out in all sorts of shapes and sizes. One of my favorites back in the day was one of my first students who started the rock and roll club at his school. Now, he went to a pretty buttoned up private Catholic school in California. So when he started the rock and roll club, people kind of looked at him like, well, I don't know, especially when he started growing his hair out and having that 80s band hair look. Okay. But he didn't care. What he did is he brought people together to share their interest in music. And one of the really cool things he did is once a semester, he would organize a group of them with chaperones to go to a concert, a local concert. And so all of a sudden, this school that had never had like a rock and roll club had 40 plus kids coming together of different backgrounds, the jocks, the nerds, everyone coming together to enjoy this music. And so he brought people together through his own individualistic interest. He took the initiative to share that passion. And as you're hearing, folks, I'm not telling you I need you to go be number one in DECA in the nation. I'm telling you, you need to show me what makes you different from the hundreds of other kids just from your school who are going to consider each of these institutions. What drives you? What do you love to do? What can you do with your free time? That's what these people are doing. They're also showing a love of learning. Now, love of learning comes through in two different ways. The first is obvious, course rigor. Plenty of students will take AP Calc, AP Chem, and AP Physics because they like STEM, and they'll go with Honors English 11 and the U.S. History course. But the kid who takes the high level courses across the board shows me that they're willing to push on all fronts, that they love to learn regardless of whether it's humanities or STEM. It's actually why some people ask, like at a BCC or an RM, do you go AP or IB? IB forces that in a way. Sure, SL may not necessarily be as difficult as HL, but it's still hard. But say you don't have IB. The majority of students from Montgomery County who are getting into the schools we're talking about today have roughly 5 APs junior year, 5 APs senior year, and are getting straight A's. Now, you might be sitting there being like, Jordan, I can't do that. That's okay. You don't have to go to an incredible school. But if we're going to talk about the institutions we are here to discuss today, you need to understand the reality of it in Montgomery County and other parts of the nation. The other place that love of learning comes through is in letters of recommendation. At the end of junior year, and for those of you who are juniors on this call, take heed to this advice. You're going to need two 11th grade teachers who write you recommendation letters. Ideally, those two teachers will be from core curriculum subjects, math, English, foreign language, science, or history, social science. Sometimes you can ask an elective teacher like a comp sci teacher if you're pursuing that major, but it should come from one of the core curriculum classes. Those teachers who really like you, who can speak to how great you were in the class throughout the year, they help show your love of learning. Because plenty of kids only come and talk to the teacher when they have to try and bring up a grade or to understand why they got like a 92 instead of a 97 on a test. The kid who takes sincere interest in understanding the topic, helping others in class, raising their hand, sitting in the front of class, never being late, they often get very good letters. And it helps as an X factor when standing out to highly selective schools. And it brings me to the last piece, likability. And everyone always looks and goes, Jordan, all these other things make sense, but likability, why do I care about that? Because I need to know you're going to mesh well with my student body. I need to know you're going to be someone we would want to spend time with. I'm sure that many of you saw an article that was published last year about the kid who was denied by like all the Ives and so on, but he pointed out how he started a multi-million-dollar company and had all the seed capital, so on. The reason he didn't get in is because that likability factor. Nobody wanted the kid who thought he was better than everyone else. The kid who actually said that he wrote about how in his essay, he didn't think he needed college or professors, but he could see how they could benefit from his intelligence. Why would I want that kid on my campus? He's going to disrupt class. He's not going to help us learn. He's going to make other people feel lesser than they should. Sure, that kid may end up coming to college and then dropping out after freshman year because he thinks he doesn't know any better. So if a kid drops out, that hurts my yield. Why would I want that kid? But for some reason, he believed that because he'd done all these things, he deserved a spot in an Ivy. You don't deserve, you earn. And your likability oftentimes comes through in your essays. In your personal statement, specifically the 650-word essay that goes to all the schools you apply to, it comes through in the way you write that because they call it the freshman year roommate test. We'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to pause for a couple questions. How do students show the pill in their college application? Quickly, passion, initiative, individuality come through in the activities, love of learning and course rigor, and letters of rec, likability in the essays. So let's talk about the two different aspects, and let's begin here with the academic side of things. You'll notice here that I put course selection rigor over grades. Everyone's always like, well, my GPA is a 4.8. That's great. Or my GPA is a 4.6. That's awesome. But what matters is that you have those great grades with the rigor. Every year I'll have a family who calls me in mid-March saying that they want help with the college application process. They're looking at Tulane, Northwestern, so on. The kid has a 3.9 GPA, and I see that that student has an AP and two honors. And I say, okay, what schools are we really going to look at? And they go, well, look at my kid's GPA. And I point out, that's great. It is a good GPA. It truly is. But you have to ask yourself when you're looking at these schools, how do you compare to the people in your zip code, to the people from your area? And when you look at the fact that the average number of APs at any one of these schools is much higher than one AP and two honors, You have to consider that your course rigor matters as much as the grades. Now, we need a balance. I've seen students try for the IB diploma and get three Bs because it's too much for them. I don't want three Bs either, right? We have to find a very specific balance here. You need to do what's best for you. And if that means doing something that an Ivy level wouldn't want, fine. Don't pay $90,000 a year to go to a school where you may not even do well because you're being compared to the best of the best or what they call the best of the best. But if you do want to consider them, they look at course rigor, they look at your grades, and many of them are now looking at test scores again. That's right, testing is back. Most of the Ivies have pretty much brought it back. Schools in the South are starting to bring it back. The Ivies did it because they just needed to remove the applicants who just, from their perspective, shouldn't be applying. Because the moment testing went away over COVID, everyone figured, why not take my shot? And listen, who am I to tell you can't do that? But I can tell you that we, the consumer, brought testing back. Our actions led schools like Dartmouth and UPenn and Cornell and Stanford to need testing again in order for them to actually be able to review the applications they should be reviewing. Because all of a sudden you had a kid with a 3.6 GPA who probably wouldn't have applied, but now that they don't need testing, maybe I'll take my shot. While I can tell you your test score doesn't tell me how smart you are, for these colleges, it is a useful tool to give them sort of the barrier they need to entry. And for the schools in the South, Clemson, Auburn, Alabama, these schools are either requiring test scores again or highly recommend them. For example, you don't see too many people getting to Clemson from your area right now without test scores. They do, but not many. And then you have University of Tennessee, Knoxville, UTK, who puts such a big emphasis on test scores from your area because the test scores are often so strong, they can use that to bring up their mean. So they take kids from a part of Maryland or a part of Mississippi who don't have good test scores, they can balance it out with the really strong test scores from highly affluent or strong areas like northern New Jersey, Montgomery County, and so on. There's still thousands of schools that don't need test scores. But what I will tell you is if you're a junior on this call, or even a sophomore, consider where you stand with testing. Because having a good test score can only help with the way things are going. You don't need both an SAT or an ACT. You want either an SAT or an ACT. For juniors, you still have a couple exams you can take. You have the May and June SATs coming up. You can also take again in August or September before early action or early decision are due. ACT, you have it coming up in June, July, September, and yeah, those three. So you could theoretically get three done before that early timeline. I know that's a lot to consider, but I can tell you that we are seeing a greater preference for test scores the more selective we're moving. Now, that's the more obvious stuff. Let's talk about some of the less obvious, and let's start with the personal rankings on the activity side. We talked before about how there's certain places on the application where characteristics are exuded. And this is where the passion, the initiative, and the individuality can come out. They also come out in the essays. But activities are a really good way to show me who you will be on my campus. Some students don't consider this, but right now you get to school at 7:45, you leave at 2:45 unless you have an after-school activity or sports, you get home at 5:30. 10 to 11 hours of the day are already spoken for and another couple with homework. And then you sleep. Not a lot of time that's unstructured. In college, you might have days where you have no class. You might have days where class starts at 8:30 or done by 11:30 and the day's yours. Activities are such a key part in understanding who you'll be on my campus. On the Common App, you can list up to 10 activities. Okay? Mm-hmm. Some students will have 10, some will have 6, some will not have enough room. What you need to care about is the quality of the application you're submitting and the quality of the activities. And I will tell you that I have yet to see a student get into a highly selective school unless they're a recruited athlete without pretty much filling up all 10 with high quality activities. Now, activities are not just clubs and organizations at school, like sports and so on. They're summer programs or summer job. They're that hobby that you have, like you're a huge Rubik's Cube kid and you have solved it in 3 seconds before, right? It's you're a bibliophile. You read 100 books a year. The time you commit outside the classroom is an activity. So if you're unsure if it's an activity, throw in the chat. I'll say yes or no. The only thing that I point out to people as of recent that I wouldn't consider an activity, I get it. You love the gym. You love to hang out with your buddies there and work out. It's not really an activity I'm looking for. Video games. If you're ranked as an esports person, by all means, that's an activity. If you spend 3 hours a night doing it and your mom and dad tell you to get off because it doesn't count towards applications, They're right. It doesn't. I don't want someone who's just going to sit in their dorm room and play video games all day. I want someone who's going to be a part of my community. You can play from time to time, but show me who you'll be. It comes back to that pointed applicant piece I mentioned before. I don't want well-rounded, touching your toes into 10 different activities. I want depth. I want deep, deep depth, pardon me. And one of the other things I often see for the majority of applicants who get into these schools are awards, honors in these areas, and not just your regional ones. State at the bare minimum, national, even international. You're huge into robotics. International awards help them to see how you're a difference maker for their engineering program and their robotics team or SAE sports team. The depth matters. But like I said, so does the essay. And for those of you on this call, we're doing an essay seminar at some point. Miss Heald will share that out. So I'm going to be fairly quick here because it's usually a whole hour-long conversation. But the things to know are that it's so easy to write a boring essay. Park Muth is a former admissions officer, director of admissions at UVA, and he coined the term McEssay. He said he would get these amazing applicants with great grades and test scores and cool activities. Then all of a sudden they'd submit this essay that was a McEssay. It was punctually correct, but it was boring and flavorless like a Big Mac. That's what he said. So how do you avoid writing these boring and flavorless essays? Stop trying to impress them. These activities you've worked so hard to curate, those grades you've worked so hard to attain, that test score you got, that's where you impress me. Let those pieces impress me. When you get to the essay, I'm no longer asking, are you academically viable for my school? I'm asking, would you be a good freshman year roommate? Are you likable? Remember how I told you likability would come back into play? This right here is a huge component of the essay. So when students write about the importance of the funds they collected as ASB president or treasurer, pardon me, you're just trying to impress me. And quite frankly, if I walk into our freshman year room with my bag and I introduce myself, hi, I'm Jordan. I'm from California. That's where I'm originally from. I love lacrosse and my dog Fido. And you say, I like treasury. I'm going to go, okay. And I'm going to go to the next room and see who's over there that I want to hang out with, right? Doesn't mean you can't be a treasure at some point while you're here, but your essay should teach me something new about you. It should give me the component of who you are as a teenager. It shouldn't just repeat what I already know from the activities or try to impress me with your accolades or your greatest strengths. And one of my favorite essays about it is from a girl who couldn't stop losing. I'll read the whole essay to you at another time at that seminar on essays, but really open up and give me a sense of who you are. I'd rather hear about how you're a terrible singer, but how you never stop trying, than hear about that game-winning field goal and being the best football player on your team. The essay matters. And just so you know, all of my students start their essays in May. They're done with the personal statement by late June, early July if they need the extra time because they are already available. Don't wait until August or September to start the personal statement, folks. August 1 is when the full application opens up. Your personal statement and all basic info on the Common App, including activities, should be done by then. I'm throwing alumni interviews out there because they still exist. But each year, these are moving further and further away from existing and even mattering. In fact, this last year, we saw a number of Ivies do away with them because they are recognizing that it was actually not fair to a number of applicants. It helped students who either had connections or who were in cities. And basically, what they wanted to do is make it more fair, so they removed them. But should you get an alumni interview, don't panic. Show up on time, online or in person. Be prepared to speak to who you are as an individual and why you think that school is good for you. They are not necessarily evaluative. They're a good way for you to learn about the school and for them to make sure that what's in your application isn't false, because plenty of people will try to falsify things. So make sure that you show your likability. Make sure that you ask them questions in return. Don't just sit there kind of like dumbfounded, and one-word answers. Show them you can communicate with an adult. And make sure that afterwards you thank them for their time, you email them a follow-up, and show the maturity they're seeking from their incoming class. I'm not going to say anything else on alumni interviews because they truly are moving away from existing, but I wanted to bring them up in case you do get them. And if you don't get them and someone else does, no, that's not a bad thing. They don't always have room for them. So Cornell, when they did run them, you'd see kids who are applying to arts and sciences get them, and a kid in the engineering program didn't. They freaked out. They don't always have enough interviewers to do it. So if you don't get one, it is not a bad sign. If you do, absolutely take advantage of it, respond to them, be on time. And no, don't wear that ratty shirt that says Jim Bro. You don't need to wear a full suit, but dress appropriately. This brings us to letters of recommendation. We talked about this before, but the reason I'm bringing these back up is because there's two sorts of letters. The first is one we talked about, the academic letters that come from your teachers. I have found that in MCPS, oftentimes you want to make that ask either right after APs or a little bit earlier. That said, if you ask earlier and a teacher says not yet, that's okay. But don't be late. Don't go asking your APUSH teacher or AP Chem teacher in mid-June, right as you're getting out of school. They may not have room. Generally speaking, I suggest asking by the end of May, and you want two 11th grade teachers. After you make the ask, thank them and email them. Mr. Smith, I really appreciate you agreeing to write my chemistry letter of rec. I've enjoyed your class. Is there a brag sheet, brag sheet you'd like me to complete? If so, complete it and get it back to him in a timely manner. If not, oh, no worries, thank you. But since I know you're going to have a lot of letters to write, I just wanted to remind you of a few things I loved about your class. Make it easy for them to write you a great letter. Don't just ask and let it go. Give them some detail so that when they start writing these in August or September after summer, they can speak intelligibly about you. The second letter is called an external recommendation. Now, not every college allows them, but most of the highly selectives do. An external recommendation can come from a mentor. It can come from somebody outside of school. It can come from someone who you worked for. It can come from a member of the clergy, like at your synagogue or mosque or church. There's a number of people who can write them. The rule of thumb here is that if you're going to ask for one, they'd be able to speak about you in a way that your teachers would not, that highlight who you are. So one that I really liked, and you don't often see them, but I got to see this one. A student I worked with this past year who was going to Bates, he got one from a camp he went to and worked at over 10 years. And the most recent year, he took kids on this 17-day expedition kayaking over like 500 miles in Michigan. And he did it alongside this mentor and sort of the guy who ran it, who got to see him teaching people, coaching them, helping them through it. And he wrote an exemplary letter. The sort of letter that doesn't often work is when you ask the teacher who's been your violin teacher for 10 years. Well, if I read that, it lacks authenticity. You know why? It's simple. You paid this person for 10 years. Of course, they're going to write you something good. I don't necessarily want one that's just by someone who's a tutor for 10 years. I want someone who's really gotten to know you through your internship, through the volunteer work you've done, through your synagogue and Jewish faith, or through your Muslim faith, whatever it may be. If you're going to ask for it, make sure that it's somebody who can speak differently about you. And so to that point, as we wrap things up here, we start talking about and answering some questions. One thing I always like to point out is there's free resources on our website. If you go to collegewise.com and you go to click resources, you can find, we have a 63 page, maybe it's longer actually now. The last I think was 63 on how to make your Common App less common. It is this awesome piece that we have. We have others on there as well. They are free. They are at your fingertips. Please take advantage of it. And juniors, just to give you a sense of what my students are doing right now, we are finalizing college lists. We are discussing who we're going to ask for recommendations. Summer plans are pretty much wrapped up, or we're waiting to hear from a couple of summer programs. And as soon as AP season is over, late May, we are starting the personal statement. You can do all this too, but don't wait. So that in mind, here is my email address. Please feel free to email me if you have questions about what I do, if you want the slide deck, whatever it may be. But with the remaining 8 minutes, I would love to answer some questions here. Let me scroll up to the top here. Where are we? Are there formulas that schools use that they use to compare students to make sense of rigor, AP, so on? So great question. Every school, every high school will send a school report. And that school report will outline course rigor, like AP versus IB diplomas, how many APs. It'll show the average test scores for the year or something. It'll show matriculation rates. So they'll be able to compare to that. But what you have to consider is when we're talking about these schools, these 40, 50, there are dozens of students from every one of these MCPS schools, maybe a few less depending, who apply. So it's an easy comparison to each other. To the 8 students from Northwest who applied to X school this year, I'll compare them to each other. And then after I've done that and chosen the couple I like, I'll now compare them to the other schools in the area and similar zip codes and so on. So they'll use that information. And when they're looking at GPA and grades, they'll have a section where they show the course rigor. The student had all A's with one B, but 15 APs. The student had all A's but two APs. They'll lean towards the student with the one B because of the rigor. I think Tennessee requires test scores. Yep, that was what I was saying. University of Tennessee requires test scores, and they look to your area to boost those numbers. Yale's looking at test scores from juniors and contacting students with high scores. A lot of schools do that. It helps them for marketing to drive up numbers. It's not trying to take away from that if your student got an email, but they'll do that pretty much for anyone who scores above a 1450 usually. Um, do colleges care about how many times you take it? So somebody commented below you. Thank you for doing so. Some schools will see all test scores because they require. Georgetown's one, University of Maryland requires all test scores, and so on. So my general rule of thumb is you don't want to take it more than 3 times, sometimes a fourth if it really makes sense to, but no more than that. Is it okay to have to leave? I have another SAT class to attend. Yes, there's a full recording. There are only a few schools that will ask to see all scores. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Yep, May 28th at 5 p.m. at BCC in person for the essay brainstorming session. See you all there. How do you balance academic rigor with the need to do SSL hours plus athletic activities and still maintain the student mental health? I wish I could answer that. Some people do, some people don't. So let me give you a sense. When you ask need to do SSL hours, you've already lost the agenda. The students getting into these schools aren't just doing these things for SSL hours to hit the 40 or whatever you need per semester or year. These are kids who have 600 SSL hours just because they love volunteering at a local community. So there's a young lady I'm working with who's in Virginia right now. She's hearing back from her school. She's doing great. She had over 17 activities. I think she ended up with 18. I don't know how. Some of them were like one of the activities is she created a book that is now in a number of pediatric offices about why going to the doctor shouldn't be scary for kids. She did that while she volunteered at a number of local organizations to help, like one for blindness prevention and other things. She ran a couple clubs at her school and she maintained 4.0 with the highest course rigor. When I was 17, I couldn't have done any of that. Truly, like I could have done a couple of them, but not all of it. Some people had the time management, they had the ability. But these are the sort of students who are getting into these schools. And this young lady, by the way, she didn't even get into Duke. That was her ED. She didn't get in. She's got into every other school, but she didn't get an ED to Duke. That's what we're talking about here. It sounds ridiculous. But if mental health is on the table, that is far more important because pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion and killing yourself to get into a school, once you get there, you're going to have to do the same in a capacity. It's not worth sacrificing mental health for the name of an institution. Are you a college guidance counselor? I'm not a college guidance counselor. I'm an independent educational consultant. So I work with students across Montgomery County and other parts of the nation. I have students in 14 different states and who I work with on a one-on-one basis. But every one of your schools has great counseling. What should high school sophomores be doing right now to prepare for summer? Well, it's a very good question, but the question really is, what is your sophomore like? What do you want to try out? There's a lot of great programs out there, summer programs, and sometimes depending on your finances, it's great to go do one of these summer discovery programs for $4,000 or $5,000 and take advantage of being on a school campus for 2 to 3 weeks. Absolutely up to you. Some are worth it, some aren't. To me, there's so many other options to consider. You could volunteer a lot and build up those SSL hours that we were talking about before, or create your position within an organization that you can volunteer at more and build that impact we talked about earlier on. You take a college course at MoCo. You don't need to spend $3,000 to take a college course online at Stanford. Go to MoCo, take that internet engineering course. Start to show colleges where your interests lie and start to learn more about a topic of interest. Get a part-time job. Those are 3 of the easiest ways to spend very little or make money this summer and still look good on a college application. How important are SSL hours in comparison to other forms of community impact? SSL hours matter to your school district. That's about it. Colleges, you need them to graduate, but if you're doing it for the SSL hours, you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. If you're applying to UPenn, every student's hit the SSL hour minimum, if not more. Okay. So if you did 40 hours across 8 different volunteer activities just to hit it, good. You did what you needed to. Students getting to these schools aren't doing it for need, they're doing it for want. They're doing this because they love giving back. They love helping their community. An example of this, a student that we worked with 2 years ago went to Dartmouth. One of the 10 things he did, by the way, Junior into senior summer, he worked with the economics department at his high school and revamped their entire 500 level. That was their top level at his school. It was a boarding school. But he helped them revamp it. He helped write the material for it. He didn't do that for SSLers. He did it because he loved the topic. That's what we're talking about here. I know how wild that sounds, but that's what we're talking about when it comes to volunteering, not doing it for SSL hours. Free for service summer programs at college. How impactful are those? Uh, Again, it's in a nutshell, each of these are helpful, but doing something for anyone can do anything for 2 weeks. Why aren't you volunteering for all of summer? Why aren't you taking time to start a new interest or hobby? I have a student right now who's decided that this summer he's going to pick up leatherworking. He wants to make a wallet for his dad because his dad's wallet's falling apart. So he's going to make his dad a wallet this summer. Likable, cool new skill, individualistic tendency, initiative, pursuing a passion. Those are the things that stand out on an application, folks. 2 week summer program is great, especially if like it's free. But end of the day, it's not something that necessarily stands out to schools of this nature. It's one of the things that students who have it don't even have space to list. Are letters of rec from sports coaches helpful? They can be. It depends though. Like if you're getting one, if you're talking about the external recommendation, you have to ask, will this be as helpful as my teacher recs? Because a lot of sports coaches can talk about how you're a great member of the team and so on, but you can only read so many of those before they all sound the same. Now, say freshman year, you were cut from the team. Sophomore year, you made it. Junior year, you thrived. And senior year, you're probably going to be captain. That might be one because that's a very interesting story and helps me to see your growth and your potential. Kate, I think that wraps us up. You want to take us home?
Yeah, I had to find my button. Yes, thank you so much, Jordan. Why don't you put your contact in the chat one more time before I turn this off? I'm going to stop.